as I go into that room, I hear this disembodied voice to my right side that says, "Run," in my ear. And as I hear that, I look forward and there's this metal cart, and it's like one of the hospital, like girdy, like hospital carts. And I see this thing go to stand up, and I don't end up seeing the front of it. I only end up seeing the back of it, but it had this like gray, bluish, decaying colored skin. It was like tall, it was lanky, like it wasn't shaped like a normal person. Like it was like super scrawny, like super skinny, but like tall and lanky. And it had this like long black greasy hair on the top of its head. And I end up seeing the back of this thing. And as I see that, I take off. Of course, like I'm not gonna stand around and like see what this thing's gonna do after that. But I don't end up telling my girlfriend or her friend, so because I'm just trying to get him out of there and I don't want to freak him out or have him trying to like look back and figure out what it is. I just tell them run and I start taking off.
Aloha and welcome to another show, guys. Today I'm excited to introduce someone who's passionate about diving into the unknown and exploring the mysteries of our world. Joining us is Shayn Jones, the creative force behind Open Minds Media and the host of two fascinating podcasts, Inquiries of Our Reality and The Bizarre Encounters. Through his work, Shayn brings a fresh perspective to the world of paranormal and the unexplained. He's here today to share his chilling experience with the Windigo and the unforgettable events that unfolded in Northville. So, get ready for an incredible conversation that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Before we dive in, guys, don't forget to follow, subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode, and please leave a positive review to help us reach more truth seekers like you. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Shayn to the show. Well, aloha, Shayn. It's great to have you here. And I've been following your work with Open Minds Media, so I'm really excited to hear about your experiences, especially about your Windigo experience and what happened in Northville. That I heard part of that, and it sounds really intriguing. But before we dive into your story, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your show? Because you have like two podcasts going on.
I got two podcasts, and then I got partially like a YouTube show that I'm trying to get doing something a little bit with. But I mean, when I started my podcast, I kind of started off with like an interview style show, which is what Inquiries of Our Reality is, where it's basically just anything open-minded. So, you know, spirituality, UFOs, conspiracies, Sasquatch, like the paranormal, all that kind of fun stuff. Anything that's an open-minded topic generally kind of gets brought onto that show. But also on top of, you know, wanting to get into these interesting conversations with people, I also do like research and deep dives and investigate and everything. So I ended up starting Bizarre Encounters, which is my second show, Bizarre Encounters with Shayn and Oren, and that one's more of like a deep dive style show. We do have some interviews mixed in here and there. Currently, we're doing a lot of interviews just because my co-host has some stuff going on with work, so he hasn't had as much time to do the other behind the scenes stuff. So yeah, kind of a little bit of a difference depending on what people are into, but still kind of diving somewhat into the same stuff. Because I mean, we definitely cover conspiracies and the occult and all that kind of stuff on Bizarre Encounters. But depending on which way you want to get your information, either got a show that's interview style or you got a show that's deep dive style. So a little bit of everything, I guess. And then the YouTube show, Bizarre Inquiries, is this. Originally it was like these little short episodes where they're like 15-20 minutes long, and people would give us like a clip or like an article or a question, and we just kind of let our minds wander and end up getting into a discussion about it. And then a couple weeks ago we decided that we're going to start making that a YouTube live show and start doing it like in an hour format once a month. So that hasn't actually kicked in yet. We haven't done an episode in that format, but it's going to be a YouTube live show. Start off originally, it's supposed to be a Patreon show, and then we just started releasing the episodes on our main feed and then on YouTube. And now we're like, hey, we're already here. We might as well do a YouTube live show. So yeah, I'm a little bit everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know how you do it because you have kids, and you do you do this full time or do you have a job too?
I wish. Actually, I work full time. Also, like I said, parent, and then I do the podcast and everything. So it's like, you know, I go to work all day, come home, take care of the kids and everything. And then like we were talking about before, we ended up starting. Usually start recording around like 9 o'clock. I'll record for like an hour or two, do some editing, end up going to sleep. Like I'm one of those people, I only sleep like 3, 4 hours a night, but if I get too much, then I get more tired. So it's like I'm cool with the 3, 4 hours, but I like staying busy.
That's crazy. For anyone who may not know what exactly a Windigo is, can you tell us what a Windigo is before you tell us about your experience at Northville?
Actually, it might actually be better if I do that in reverse because I
Okay.
kind of have this whole like idea and theory about Wendigos and like what it's kind of turned into, but I
Okay.
feel like it kind of flows a little bit better if I tell my experience first. But yeah, then I can get kind of get
Yes.
a little bit more into the explanation of that. But uh,
Okay.
I guess a good spot to start. This was before I really started getting into like paranormal investigating or doing anything with the show. This was like back when I was like 19, and I started the show about 3 years ago now, and I'm around 30. So this is way before the show started. So I didn't really like dive into it like that, where I knew all the rules and everything. So I guess I'll kind of tie in all the Northville stuff together. There's one like shadow person type story, and then I'll kind of tie into like the Wendigo experience. But so the very first experience that we started having there was we kind of got into this idea of urban exploring. My girlfriend is a photographer, and I've always like been kind of interested in the paranormal stuff, but I didn't really research it too much. But I like the like, beat up, decrepit looking places, so urban exploring sounded cool. A little bit of something for both of us. So we ended up finding this place called Northville Psychiatric Hospital, which was probably about like a half hour or so from where we live in just north of the Detroit area. And this place is pretty good size. It's like let's see how many stories. I think it's like an 8-story hospital. And then there's also like a full campus. So there's like a couple dorms. There's like a pool house. There's like a sports activity area. There's like a couple different, it takes up like a pretty good size area and it's like a full campus. But we figured that'd be a cool place to go because one, there's a lot of different buildings to explore. It's not just like you get into one building, that's it, and then you leave. So we figured it'd be a cool place to kind of figure out and tackle a bit. So we ended up trying to figure out a really good way to get in there. And right next door to it is a police station. So you kind of have to figure out a good way to get in because, we'd sit up there sometimes and see like people getting arrested, like trying to drive in the back and everything. But we ended up figuring out that there's also another hospital back through this like wooded area behind the place. So, it's a hospital. There's always a bunch of cars there. Just park your car there. You end up walking through, and then they're not looking for cars or seeing anything. So when we first started going to this place, my girlfriend would take pictures. We'd get some like orbs and stuff, but with the orbs and like old abandoned places like that, I mean, it could definitely be dust particles. Could be orbs. I mean, I don't necessarily want to say that every single like little orb you see in a picture you take in a place like that is necessarily like a spirit or anything like that. So it's kind of on the fence when it comes to that one, unless you see something like profound like a basement or something like that. But just kind of like little weird stuff like that. But um, I ended up finding this no smoking sign that I thought was really, really cool. So I ended up like scraping it off the wall and taking this no smoking sign. And then I ended up also finding this weird little like tiki head that looked like it was made out of like styrofoam, and it looked like somebody like carved it and like painted it. So I assume that since it was a like mental hospital, that more than likely it was probably made by a patient at some point because you can't necessarily give like patients like that like a piece of wood and like a knife and tell them to like carve something out of it. So next best thing, give them a chunk of styrofoam and like a like a butter knife or something maybe, or I don't know, something to just scrape it off and just make arts and crafts with it. But I thought it was kind of weird, thought it was cool. So I ended up taking it home with me, and that's kind of where stuff got a little bit weird. Where we got home, we ended up dropping the backpacks and everything off upstairs. Then we came down to go and get a snack, and the way the house was set up, there was like the front room area, then the kitchen right behind it, and then there was two doorways on both sides, so it was kind of like a full like loop around. So I'm at the bottom of the stairs, which comes into the front corner of the like front room area. And I'm standing at the base of the stairs. My girlfriend goes to go straight across to go into the kitchen to get a snack. And we end up seeing this dark figure sitting on the couch. And it was like the room was blacked out. It was like the middle of the night. The curtains were closed and everything. There wasn't any lights on. And there was this like dark figure that was like darker than dark, just sitting on the couch, and she ends up doing that thing where she beelines past it, where like, she sees it and she doesn't like react right away. So she just like keeps walking straight past it, ends up looping around the corner, and then she stops and looks at me. And then she's like, "You saw that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I definitely saw that." So we both look back over there, and then it's not there anymore. So I'm like, "All right, that's a little weird." So I'm usually a night owl. I end up staying up for a while at night, and my girlfriend usually falls asleep pretty early, so she's sleeping. I'm watching TV, and I end up hearing like this walking down the hallway. I hear do 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 because it sounds like somebody ends up getting pushed down the stairs. And so right when that happens, my girlfriend jumps up and she goes, "Whoa!" And I go, "What just happened?" She goes, "I just had a dream I got pushed down the stairs." I'm like, "That's crazy because I just heard somebody fall down the stairs."
Oh my God.
So we end up, of course, getting those things, and we say, "All right, we're going to take these back because this is getting a little weird here now." I mean, they already had some stuff
Mhm.
happen in that house where they would hear like footsteps and stuff down the hallway, but they never had anything crazy like that. Anytime I asked them about it, they always said, "Oh, there's a little boy that's been following us around forever, but he doesn't do anything. We just hear him walking down the stair or walking down the hallway every once in a while at night." So, and there's something else happening besides that, then it gets a little bit weird. So we assumed that it probably had something to do with those items that we brought back. So we end up bringing those back. And I guess there's like a paranormal thing that happens again before we get back into, the Windigo type stuff. So the only other like kind of weirdly paranormal thing that happened there was we were up on, I think it was the third floor, and there was this blue door that had a smiley face pointed on or painted on it. And we were all up there. There was weirdly enough one of the floors where none of the windows were broken or anything. So there wasn't like wind or anything, and this door ends up slamming shut. Like somebody like full blown just slammed it as hard as they possibly could. And we are like, oh, it ended up scaring the crap out of all of us. So we all like go over there, we look, we're trying to like see if we can hear any footsteps or anything like that. Because the place is so open and old that it's like you could hear people moving around on other floors. They'd be crunching on stuff. And we never ended up hearing anybody else there. So we ended up trying to recreate it. So we opened the door up. Um, just sat around in that area for a while, tried to see if it would slam shut, if there'd be a gust of wind or anything like that. And nothing ended up happening again with that door. So we chalked that up that may have been something weird with this place. And actually, just a fun little side piece of information. Do you watch like horror movies at all? Are you somebody that's into horror movies?
Sometimes. Yeah. Yep.
Have you ever heard of the movie It Follows?
No, that one I
No,
haven't.
okay. So there's this movie called It Follows, and for anybody that has seen that, the whole concept of the movie is basically that uh, somebody ends up sleeping with somebody, and then they end up getting this thing that like follows them around from like a distance, and they can't let them catch them, but they always look different every time they come up. But the way you transfer it is through sleeping with somebody. So there's a
Oh.
part where the main character in the beginning ends up getting with this one guy, and they're in the middle of this parking lot with this big building behind them with this like grass and everything growing out in the concrete. That's actually that place. That's Northville Psychiatric Hospital for anybody that's seen that movie. So I thought that was pretty cool. They filmed that in
Yeah.
Michigan there. But that's usually the parking lot that a lot of people would park, thinking that they'd be
Okay.
able to get away with it, and then the cops would show up and sit and wait at at their car, like, "All right, where are you guys coming to sneak away from us? Because we already see your car. We're like standing here."
Oh my God.
But so kind of continuing on with the story a bit too. So another time that we had been there, and I don't know if this actually plays in or not, but I always tell it as part of it because when you kind of start diving into this stuff, it might possibly play an aspect into it. But being from Detroit area, Michigan, which is southeastern Michigan, we're not like an area that has cougars or anything like that. Like we don't really have maybe bears when you start getting a bit north, but not really anything like bigger like that near the city because it's so overgrown and it's such an urban jungle that it's like there's not really much places for anything. You don't really see anything besides deer. So there's that little patch of woods that I mentioned a little bit earlier that we passed through to get into this place, and we were up on one of the floors. I don't remember exactly what floor, and I'm looking out the back window, and it's my girlfriend, me, and one of her friends, and she ends up looking out the window with me, and we see this cougar that basically slinks out of the trees and looks up at us, and then it slinks back in. And I was like, "You saw that, right?" And she's like, "I definitely saw that." I'm like, "That was a cougar." And she was like, yes, it definitely was. So I'm like, all right, well, that's the way we got to go through to get back. So I guess we're going to go around the front. We're going to take the long way all the way around the block to get to our car. We're not going to cross through those woods because I'm not taking any chances.
Yeah.
And I ended up looking up like news reports on this, and there was like one or two news reports on it saying that there was people that saw a cougar near this area, but they never ended up finding a body. They don't know where it came from. Like it was just seen a couple times around that time, and then it completely disappeared. And I mean, this other part might possibly play a part in that, but I don't know. Still seems kind of weird too. Uh, Northville Psychiatric Hospital had a couple random deaths that happened there, which is why the police watched it so much that people fell down some of the elevator shafts.
Oh.
And I don't know, maybe that plays a role with the whole cougar thing. Maybe it plays a role with the whole Windigo thing. But I always thought that was a little bit weird because like the doors were almost shut and some of them were like welded. So unless somebody like tried to shove themselves in there, it wasn't like somebody just stumbled and fell down an elevator shaft there. Like it was just, it seemed really, really weird. And kind of going back into the 80s, for anybody that's familiar with Linda Godfrey, she has
Mm-hmm.
a book called Weird Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
and she actually talks about Northville on a couple pages in there. And she was talking about some like occult murders that happened back in like the 80s in the tunnels and everything, which again will also kind of play a little bit of a factor maybe in all of this kind of stuff. But yeah, so anybody that kind of wants some more information on this place and some of like the backstory, that's definitely a good resource to be able to check this place out a bit. But going into like the main story, so we had gotten to a point where we'd been to this place so many different times that we knew every single building. We knew where like the creepy church was. We knew where like the morgue was and everything like that. And so it just got to a point where we're like, all right, either we're going to go to a new place or we're going to try to find something different to do around this area. And there's the Northville tunnels, which go for like miles underneath Northville. And they were like access tunnels. And, they'd also use them for like, I'm assuming like plumbing and everything like that back in the day too. They probably ran it partially through there, through the ceilings and everything. But uh, this is supposedly where like these murders and stuff like that happened back in the 80s. But we never ended up going
What?
down there because, you don't want to end up running out of light or running out of batteries in our flashlights when, you're like a couple miles into this place because it goes all through the city. So it's like,
What?
it's all pitch black down there. You got to feel your way back if anything happens. So it was like we were always like, nah, let's not do that just in case. So we decided one day that we were just gonna, go in a little bit and check it out, see what it was all about. But we weren't gonna go too far into there. We're just gonna, maybe walk a couple 100 feet in, check it out, that kind of thing. So we ended up going down into the basement through a different entrance that I normally would go through into the basement. Because we knew that there was an access point down there and there's this like divider wall and they tried to block off a bunch of areas in this place. Like they welded certain doors shut. So you have to go through different areas to get into this area that's, just beyond like a welded door that you can see through and stuff. But so they had like certain areas that were blocked off and you kind of had to figure out how to get into this place. But so we ended up going down into the basement through a different point than we normally did because we knew that the tunnel entrance was over in that area. And it was me, my girlfriend, and one of her friends. And we ended up coming down the stairs, and to the right side, there was this wall where it was like a doorway was made into it because it was an all brick wall, but it doesn't look like somebody like knocked it out. It looked like at some point, like a construction crew like removed the bricks and they just never end up putting like a doorway or anything back in there, but it was like professionally removed. So it was definitely a doorway that was intended to be there for some reason. But so we ended up coming down there and I see that doorway and I was going to go in there just to check it out because I was like, all right, cool. New room I haven't actually seen before here. So I turned to go into that room. And as I go into that room, I hear this disembodied voice to my right side that says, run in my ear. And as I hear that, I look forward and there's this metal cart and it's like one of the hospital, like Gertie, like hospital carts. And I see this thing go to stand up and I don't end up seeing the front of it. I only end up seeing the back of it, but it had this like gray, bluish, decaying colored skin. It was like tall, it was lanky, like it wasn't shaped like a normal person. Like it was like like super scrawny, like super skinny, but like tall and lanky. And it had this like long black greasy hair on the top of its head. And I ended up seeing the back of this thing. And as I see that, I take off. Of course, like I'm not going to stand
Yeah.
around and like see what this thing's going to do after that. But
Yes.
I don't end up telling my girlfriend or her friend. So, because I'm just trying to get him out of there and I don't want to freak him out or have him trying to like look back and figure out what it is. I just tell them run and I start taking off. And as we're running out of this building and they're following me on how to get out, my girlfriend's taking pictures behind us. And if you remind me, I can send it to you after the show.
Okay.
She ends up capturing a picture of whatever this thing is that I saw. But the weird part about it was more of like an apparition where it's translucent in the picture, which kind of gets into like this whole weird thing with like Wendigos with like, what are they? What are they actually? Why do I think that I could have possibly seen a Wendigo? Because I don't always just sit in that camp for sure. Like I don't guarantee that's what I saw. It's just mainly that my research has led back to that. And if anybody else has a better explanation, I'm always down to hear it because I don't think I'll ever fully figure this thing out. But as I started diving into it, um, everything that I would look up would end up coming back to this like Wendigo idea. But when I actually looked up like a picture of a Wendigo, you end up getting this, the typical like what people imagine a Wendigo looks like with like the deer head, the antlers, this like half human, half beast type of thing. And when I started actually looking up what like the natives, how they would describe this thing, they described it more as this like zombie like decaying like flesh being that it would get so hungry that it would like chew its own lips off and everything. And they never described it as this like native, this like deer headed, antlered beast man being. And when I started kind of digging into it a little bit more, I kind of got into this idea that, just like a lot of the stuff, when the settlers came back through and they started hearing about all these sacred areas and all of these different places, they started putting this like demonic pagan connotation on it, where they would say like, all right, this is like a sacred ground of ours. And then they'd come through and go, all right, we're going to call it the devil's tea kettle. We're going to call it the devil's this. We're going to call it the devil's that.
Yeah.
So they would just retake these stories and
Hmm.
they would view it as like pagan. So they would add these like pagan ideas onto it. So what I assumed happened was it was a matter of when the settlers were coming through, they would hear these Wendigo stories, and then they started putting their own twist on it, retelling these stories. So then they started adding like the features of like the more pagan views of things, where like they had the antlers and like the demon, almost the demon looking like a demon looking build and skull and everything like that. And it ended up separating where like there was this actual thing that people were seeing, and then on the other side there was this creature that it turned into just from telephone playing folklore and people adding their own views onto it. So it ended up becoming this like obscure concept about this like folklore creature. And then all of a sudden you have this reemergence, relatively recently it seems, with like the rake and like the pale crawler, where people are seeing these things. And what I think is that those were exactly what they were describing as the Wendigos. But as the story got spun and people started seeing these things again, they already had this idea that this antlered being was the Wendigo. So then they were like, all right, what is this thing that we're seeing? And then that's when you start seeing the name like Pale Crawler, Wendigo, or Rake, all this type of stuff, because they ended up renaming this thing that was already being described by other people. And so like when you start putting all the weird clues together, like for example, I saw this thing down in the tunnels, and everybody knows like tunnels, that are buried, they're underground, are definitely like colder than, above surface. And it was like summer, and it was definitely like 30 degrees colder than the surface underneath in these tunnels. And part of the lore with like the Wendigos is the fact that you're not safe from the first snowfall to the last snowfall, because that's when they could be out, that's when they'd be about, that's when like, the whole idea of how somebody would turn into a Wendigo, which I can get into, kind of comes into effect. But so the other part of the lore with that was that during the summer these things would have to stay underground or in caves or bury themselves or be somewhere cool, basically, so that this decaying flesh would be able to like preserve itself. So I ended up having this sighting during the summer, and like I said, it was down in the tunnels where it was like 30 degrees colder, which is almost like a cave. So I started finding all these weird like little pieces. And even the fact of like part of the whole Wendigo lore is that you end up turning into it from resorting to cannibalism during the winter, and this like evil spirit ends up like consuming you and taking you over from the inside out. So you end up like cannibalizing your family, you end up cannibalizing like
Oh,
anybody around you. Like you turn into this thing where your hunger can never be quenched, so you just continuously eat and eat and eat, and it gets bigger and bigger as it eats and eats and eats. But there's this internal struggle between the consciousness or soul of like the man or the human or the being, whatever, inside of it, and then there's also this evil spirit inside of it So there's this whole thing with it that if you figure out what its name is, they'll like stop in their tracks for a minute and be able to like remember who they were for a second before like the evil spirit ends up taking over again. So part of the whole thing was like if you figured out their names, you could temporarily like stun them for a minute. And so I was talking to another podcaster at one point, and they threw the idea of maybe because not that I'm a lot, but like 25% Cherokee, that maybe it like sensed something in you that was familiar with it. So it was actually the person that was inside that was whispering, basically telling you to leave before it couldn't have control over this thing again. And like I said, you start putting all the pieces together, and
Interesting.
this is like where my research has led, even though,
Mm-hmm.
I definitely am interested in other answers, but
Yeah,
um, I've even had people suggest with like the kind of occult background of this place too, that maybe it could have been something that was like summoned at some point, or something that was opened through a gate that somebody opened, maybe even unintentionally because graffiti, people like putting pentagrams and all these symbols
sure.
everywhere. They don't know what they mean, but
Yep.
like I said, my research has kind of led there. I don't know for sure if that's what I saw. I know what I saw, but I don't know what to classify it as, I guess. But that's the best way that I've kind of come around to it. But like I said, I'm always open to suggestions if anybody else has any ideas on it. But all of that ended up eventually kind of leading me into my podcast where, I didn't come out and start telling this story right away because I didn't want to, be the guy that came out with a podcast and I have this like experience. And it was something I didn't really know how to like sort in my mind. So I didn't really like want to tell people about it until I kind of felt like I had some kind of basis to possibly start explaining it. So part of that is literally like what led into my podcast was having that experience and starting to research and try to have conversations with people about like the experience that I had and all the other experiences I've had, and yeah, kind of led me to I guess where I am now. And now I'm popping on the shows and actually kind of telling the story now that I
Yeah,
actually
that's
kind of feel like
cool.
I have some information to share with it.
Yeah, that's really cool. Now, what was there before? Was it a Native American ground or something like that? Or sacred place, maybe? A burial ground? Do you
As far
know?
as I know, it wasn't like a
Mm,
burial ground or anything, but I know that there was definitely like nomadic tribes in the area. So, I mean,
okay.
that's not to say that maybe something hasn't happened in that area at some point,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe there was somebody that was buried there that, could have been in the wooded area where maybe they didn't
Sure.
even tear that up. They just kind of tore up around it and purposely left the wooded area. So, I mean, I've looked into it. There was definitely tribes in the area, but I
Mm,
couldn't find anything that was set in stone direct to that specific location.
interesting. I know some people believe that there's places around the world where the veil between reality and other dimensions are thinner. Do you think Northville is one of these spots, maybe?
I mean, it could definitely be, considering that it was like a mental hospital. I mean,
Mm,
there's definitely like a lot of trauma and a lot of like
mm-hmm.
traumatic moments that definitely happened there. I'd hear stories from people's parents and different other people that I talked to that had family that lived in the area at one point, and they all mentioned these like stories about you hear like the patients screaming and running through the woods, and they'd have to run out and catch
Oh,
them sometimes. And I don't know if it was like the urban legends possibly from the area of like kids just kind of making stuff up from a hospital, but there was definitely a lot of traumatic stories that came out of that place. And I mean, on top of that, I mean, think about how many people were probably there, uh, not because they wanted to. I mean, it may have been maybe the best place for them, maybe not. I guess it depends on how the hospital takes care of their patients. Because any hospital like this, it seems like folklore is always going to end up taking over eventually because people gravitate towards the dark stuff. But like regardless, there was a lot of people that were under a lot of stress, under a lot of trauma, under a lot of different situations. So, I mean, I definitely think that if there was the possibility for the veil to be broken, that would definitely be a place. And I mean, even just schizophrenia as a whole, I mean, I've talked to a few researchers that actually coming at it from like a scientific perspective, where they also kind of have like the Christian perspective on things. They definitely believe that it's demons could possibly be like different dark entities that are basically whispering into somebody, and in turn they basically start believing that it's actually them themselves. So if there is any validity to that statement, regardless if you believe it or not, it definitely seems like there would be like a high amount of people that probably had schizophrenia in that area. And if you have that much dark activity happening in one spot, I mean, it's bound to create some type of ripple effect to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely. So Northville, is that an area or is that the hospital?
Northville is the name of the city, and then Northville
Oh,
Psychiatric Hospital is the name of the hospital itself. So everybody calls it Northville for short, but Northville is also the name of the city.
I see. I see. Wow. If somebody were to go investigate Northville, is it still around that somebody could still go there?
So they do have some of the buildings, as far as I know.
Okay.
They may have torn them down by now. I know they tore
Hmm.
down the main hospital, weirdly enough, right after, the random deaths and everything happened there. And I definitely think that these cities, even if they don't believe it, they see something happening in the area, or maybe even some people do believe it in the city. Definitely want to get rid of that area if people are getting hurt there. I mean, you definitely hear about a lot of weird stuff with like Sasquatch, where people have sightings, and then there'll be like, don't or bears have been seen in this area sign. So it seems like even if people don't believe in it, they still take into consideration that something may have happened there and maybe do some cause effect accordingly. Where, if this thing ended up actually doing anything to those people that fell down the elevator shaft, or it was just random kids getting hurt, they saw it as a problem. So they had ended up tearing down the building. And I think they turned it into a park. But there might
Oh.
be some of the satellite buildings, but I haven't been there probably in about 3, 4 years now. So there's a good possibility that they may have extended that park and also tore down the satellite buildings at this point. But that's one of those places that this is what I was saying. Like, I'll never get solid answers with it because I can't
Hmm.
go back to actually like investigate it like that. Because after that experience, we didn't really end up going back, and they ended up tearing it down before I got to like fully understand and try to want to go back. It was more like you have an experience like that and you don't want to go back, but then after enough
Exactly.
time passes, you research it and you think that you maybe have an idea, then you're like, all right, I feel somewhat prepared. Like I do need to go back to try to at least establish something in my head that maybe this is what I saw. But yeah, as soon as I got to that point, I already tore down the main building, which was the access point to get into where I was.
Interesting. And you said there's tunnels that's under there that goes miles. Are these military tunnels?
They were access tunnels at one point. I know that like at least the ones coming from Northville, they would use it sometimes for like transferring patients and stuff.
Yeah.
If there was like bad weather and stuff, they would also use it for transferring patients and stuff during the winter and everything.
Hey, Ohana, I hope you're loving this conversation as much as I am. I just wanted to pause for a quick moment to ask for your support. If you're enjoying what you're hearing and feel like we've earned it, I'd be so grateful if you could leave us a rating or review. Your honest feedback really helps us grow and reach more people who love exploring these fascinating topics. And if you think this episode would resonate with someone you know, don't forget to share it with them. Mahalo nui loa for being part of our journey. Now, back to the show.
Transferring patients and stuff during the winter and everything. And then it also just extended into the city. Like I said, I think they also just had like old plumbing and everything down there. Because when you go down there, there's like, big pipes across the ceiling and the walls and everything. Supposedly there are a few access points still, but that was never like the main area, I guess, that I fully wanted to go into. Because, like I said, it goes for miles underneath the city. So like, there's like these random hatches you can find that people have busted out the door to, and then you can access into these places. But yeah, it was never one of those spots that I wanted to get one on one in that tunnel. Like I'd want to kind of stay at the edge of the tunnel, at least make it so I had the open area to try to get back through instead of, this man standing sized tunnel. Like at that point, you feel like you're in one of those mazes in like a horror movie. You're
Yeah.
like, which way's the way out? Which way's the way out?
Yeah, that would definitely be scary. I wouldn't do that for sure. Oh my gosh. Do you think fear and desperation are often tied to encounters with the Wendigo? Like, do you think these emotions can attract its presence or could it be part of how it manifests?
I mean, it's definitely possible. Um, I haven't actually researched too far into like that side because I don't think that there's really much explanation as far as that goes into these things. But um, I mean, with anything that seems to be on the supernatural spectrum, and this thing definitely seems to be one of those things that's physical, but also somewhat in like the spiritual realm too. You definitely have to take that into consideration that there's probably something that has to do with fear or anger or any of the negative emotions that could possibly attract these things. But um, I don't know if it necessarily played a part in like my experience or most experiences. Most of the time, it seems like people stumble on these things, the ones that I have heard of, or even like the pale crawler or rake experience, and then once they're figured out, then they're like, oh crap, and then they start chasing, where
Yeah.
it's like you stumble upon these things and they just have that hunger, that anger, whatever it is, that they just end up chasing you down afterwards. But I mean, most rake and pale crawler experiences, same thing, and that's kind of why I think that we just renamed something that already had a name because it
Yeah.
just got lost into folklore.
Yeah. 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 For sure. You said you have other experiences too. Is it through Northville or just other experience in general? Paranormal
um
experience.
I mean, I wouldn't say that it was anything like to take home as far as like Sasquatch and stuff, but I have had a few off experiences with Sasquatch.
Did
Um,
you?
I also had I guess you could say for like a reptilian experience, or shapeshifter possibly experience at one point, but that one was also a pretty quick one. And then I
Hmm.
also grew up with having like astral travel experiences, but uh, it was never anything that I was able to like control or anything. It kind of just randomly happened when it wanted to, and then afterwards I'd always have like sleep paralysis, so it kind of made it so I knew that I had astral traveled versus like dreamed. That's kind of how I like differentiated the two. But I mean, that went on for a while, and that's kind of what got me into just kind of looking at things from a different perspective and, kind of believing that there was something else weird out there.
Yeah, for sure. So did you see these, I don't know, aliens or reptilian people at home, or were you doing investigation?
Actually, I was at Myers, and which is like a local grocery store. I guess not super local. It's at least like Myers and like in the Midwest area, but
Okay.
um, it was like right after I started my podcast, which was right when all this, I don't know if you wanted to say it on the show, but all the stuff was happening that was happening a couple
Sure.
of years ago.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I just started my podcast. I was amped up. I was just going about stuff. And when I first started my show, I was a lot more amped up with like ranting about conspiracies, like politics, all that kind of stuff. But so I was in the middle of the store and I was just ranting and raving about like the whole reptilian concept and like the controlling elite and like all this type of stuff. And I end up turning when I'm doing that while I'm talking to my girlfriend and ranting about this. And there's this woman who ends up turning and she looks at me and she's wearing a mask and she ends up pulling it down and I end up seeing this like layer that was basically like a reptilian face that like sat over her face. It was like an overlay, like almost like a double image is the best way to describe it. And then she
Damn.
just puts her mask up and then turns back and keeps talking to her husband. And it was one of those things that I was like, there wasn't bad lighting. It was like the middle of a grocery store. It's brightly
Mm-hmm.
lit. She wasn't wearing a hat
Mm-hmm.
where there would have been like anything partially covering her face. It was just this woman's face. She had her hair back and she just pulls her mask down, shows me, and it has this overlay and then pulls it back up. And that's when I started kind of diving into this whole like shapeshifter concept that, most people hear shapeshifter, reptilian, and, maybe it's a bit out there for most people, especially when you start talking about like the reptilian controlling elite and everything. But kind of diving into like the whole skinwalker concept or
Yeah.
shapeshifter concept, I definitely think that it's not exactly how people think that it is, where most
Mm.
people hear those names and they imagine this thing that literally changes its physical shape and changes into something. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's a matter of, I think most of these like ancient mysteries on how different creatures or beings and shamans and, medicine men are able to do this type of stuff isn't necessarily as magic as we think, but rather like more of an understanding of a science that we don't fully understand, where it's, you know, or alchemy ends up turning into chemistry eventually. It's just a matter of more understanding of it. And I feel like a lot of the stuff like this kind of starts diving into the whole aspect of psychology. And I think it's like a master understanding or an occult knowledge of psychology and how to trick the human mind into seeing something that's not actually there. And obviously, there's a lot of like weird stuff diving into the mind where you can, manipulate somebody to think a certain way by flashing a certain color or by doing something like super residual by like touching your ear so many times. Like that'll trigger something subconscious in people. So I think that the whole shapeshifter, skinwalker, uh, and this will kind of tie a little bit into the reptilian thing, concept of these shapeshifters. It's not that they're physically changing shape, but rather that they know how to manipulate the perception of somebody into seeing what they want them to see. And even going into the skinwalker thing, for anybody that kind of has that skinwalker ranch view of these things, usually what they were described as when you start diving into the folklore was, they were shaman that started making these dark deals, and they would take the skin of something, and then in turn they would be able to turn into that thing once they possess the skin of this thing. I think that's a matter of, again, like knowing how to manipulate the mind where, if you're wearing this fur, you're coming at somebody in the dark and you move these specific ways, you could trick the mind into thinking that they're seeing this like deformed wolf or this deformed creature when that may not actually necessarily be what it is. Or even on another side, if you get into the spiritual aspect of things, I definitely think that it's more possible to manipulate somebody's perception spiritually, where like even taking a picture, like you're going to see this thing, it's almost like you're hypnotized to specifically see this thing, and they're not actually fully physically like changing form. But I definitely think that there's two ways to get about that, and it seems like you kind of see this spike with the humans too, that there's the natural way to get to somewhere, and then there's the artificial way of getting somewhere. So, an example of that would be like you can meditate to get to like a spiritual plane, but on the other side, you could take like synthetically produced LSD to also get to that meditative state. So there's these two ways of getting to the same point, and there's this natural way, and then there's also this synthesized way. So you have the natural concept of the shapeshifter, which is again understanding of psychology and how to manipulate the mind into seeing what you want them to see. And then on the other side, you got to take in the whole aspect of advanced technology that if you believe in societies that have been here longer than us, or even the possibility of aliens. And I know that sounds off to a lot of people, but like realistically, what sounds more probable, that we're the only thing that exists in this entire reality, or that there's a different planet that exists on every single star that you see that probably has some form of life on it? And to me, like that seems significantly more logical. So the whole alien concept, like it's not without a doubt in my mind, like even if they're not necessarily here yet, which is like a whole conspiracy, like there's something out there. There's no way that there isn't. Like it just seems way less logical to think any other way. But so anyways, there's this advanced technology that you could possibly use to basically put like a hologram of something like over yourself, which is what I definitely think could be possible with this whole like reptilian thing, where you're talking about like the ruling elites. So, talking about futuristic technology, I mean, just advanced technology if they have the money to do it, and they've been the ruling power forever. But what I saw, I definitely think was using some type of like synthetic version, or maybe in the other side. I mean, people talk about the spiritual factor of like the reptilians, and I've never sat down and had a conversation with a reptilian before, so I don't know for sure. But it could definitely be tech, could be something a little bit more natural. But principle of what I'm trying to get at here is I definitely don't think it's physically manipulating its form into turning into something else. I think it's more of like a visual trick of the eye than anything.
That's interesting. I agree. And you said a lot of interesting things. I know in Hawaiian culture, entities like the night marchers or the Menihunis, or Pele, that's the volcano goddess, they evoke both fear and respect. And they serve as a warning about respecting nature and the spiritual world. So do you think maybe the fear of surrounding creatures like the Windigo or the Skinwalker is meant to teach respect for forces maybe beyond human understanding?
I mean, definitely so. I mean, with a lot of like the native stories, it seems like it's kind of like a double-sided thing that you could take it literally or you could take it completely symbolically. And it seems like with most people, when you talk about the whole Windigo concept, they take it more as like a metaphorical story for, don't uh, resort to cannibalism when you're at your last moments. Like that's the sin. That's like the mortal sin. Like you don't do that. Like so they got to make these stories that'll tell people like, hey, if you're in that point where you're going to eat your family, just remember that if you do it, you're going to turn into this monster. It scares people away from doing something like that because again, you don't want to see that happen because people living in tribes and everything, like these people personally. You don't want to walk into a family home after a long hard winter and see that there was one of them that ate everybody. So there's the one view that you could look at it like that, which is definitely an aspect of like respect nature. Like you need to make sure that you respect nature to the point where you have yourself enough supplies where you don't have to resort to this cannibalistic act during winter and turn into this creature. And then on the other side, there could definitely be a principle of maybe that's how it started. Maybe there's another mix that kind of comes into it. And when you start getting into like like the whole giant concept in America, um, it seems like there's a lot of validity behind that as far as skeletons being found, as far
Mm-hmm.
as the burial mounds, all of that. So, one theory that my co host and I kind of threw on it is assumably a giant, they would need a lot of food intake. They'd need a lot of protein. They'd need a lot of everything. So, during the winter, it definitely seems like there may be scarce food when it comes to these like giants that were supposedly in ancient America. And they talk about these things being like tall and lanky and like
Mm-hmm.
decrepit and everything. So we kind of tossed the idea that, again, if you put validity behind the fact that there was giants in America, which we definitely do, then could it be possible that what the natives were seeing was these starving giants, and they would get to a point where they were starving, where they would basically just go crazy and try to eat whatever was present around them because they would get so desperate from not having enough protein intake because it's harder to find food during the winter. And they just started adding in another story that they were trying to tell about, not resorting to cannibalism, and it kind of got spun in. So it's hard to know with like a lot of these oral
Yeah,
traditions where the root is exactly, where there
sure.
may have been telephone mixed into it, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different theories and different ways to look at it. But um, the whole Windigo concept seems completely out there to people. But when you start viewing it from different perspectives, like it seems a lot less folklory than
Yeah,
how most people would kind of feel after hearing the word Windigo.
yeah, that's true. And that's an interesting twist on it too. That's pretty cool. Do you still do investigations now? Do you still do that?
I do them when I have the chance to.
Okay.
Um, the last time I unfortunately got to do one was summer. Just because it's been cold here, so it's just kind of been hard to get out and be able to go on like squatch hikes or anything like that. But I know as soon as spring starts back up, one of my buddies and I are going to be starting to dive into a little bit of a side project, I guess you could say. We got a documentary that we're going to start
Oh,
working on that we've been
cool.
talking about for a while. We're going to start doing that in spring. But we're trying to keep that close to our chest right now because we don't want anybody to
Sure.
swoop in and try to do something about the same thing that we want to do because it hasn't really
Okay.
been talked about. So we want to make sure that we can hopefully be the first ones to get to it, considering that it's a Michigan thing and we're both from Michigan. And
Oh,
we just don't
cool.
want anybody to come up that's not from Michigan and try to talk about this thing that we're going to be
Sure.
researching into. But
That's pretty cool. Um, do you believe that many paranormals, I guess, encounter is tied to specific locations? Do you think that the land itself maybe kind of holds these energies or memories that can interact with us?
it depends on what type of haunting or what type of paranormal interaction it is. I definitely get into the whole like stone tape theory, which is basically describing that the Earth itself almost works like how a VHS tape would work, where there's a specific magnetic force to it, where
Hmm.
using magnets basically,
Uh-huh.
specific types of stone. Um, yeah, basically that it just ends up recording itself just like a VHS tape would work.
Sure.
So there's definitely that whole idea with like a residual haunting that it just could have
Yeah.
been something that happened so many times in that area that it basically ended up leaving this mark that's always going to be there. And but then on the other side, there definitely seems to be an aspect of when something traumatic or something that has some type of like high emotion to it um happens in an area, there seems to be this like reoccurring gate that possibly happens through that. And I don't necessarily think it's always just something traumatic, because at least like me kind of thinking about it, when people hear like saloon music, for example, I don't
Hmm.
think necessarily that was anything traumatic. I've been trying to ask people about this who've been to some of these places and heard these different music and stuff, like kind of how they feel about it. But I think that also, if you have an area where it's been such high emotion, that the same thing could happen. That so
Hmm.
many people had such a great time at this bar and they hung out, they had conversations, they loved the music, that there was such an emotional tie and transfer of energy that happened there that it ends up leaving its mark there too. So I think that can kind of flow on like both sides of the spectrum on that one. But then on the other side, you get into these like disembodied beings, whatever you want to call them, because I know, whatever, million different cultures, million different views. There's 100 different names for these things, but I definitely think that those are a little bit different, where they can get an attachment to somebody, or maybe they're attached to a certain place of land, or they're meant to protect a certain piece, or they literally just wander around and just look for the next target. So I kind of think it depends specifically on the situation, but there definitely seems to be a strong tie to specific land, whether or not it's from like either something happening there at some point, or by somebody possibly putting some type of protection or curse or whatever you want to call it, depending on which side of the spectrum you kind of want to view it on the specific land. I definitely think that that also plays a key factor, like most people kind of see with the whole Native American burial ground concept, that there seems to be like a curse that gets put on it, where you're not supposed to unbury these things or mess with these things at all, otherwise it ends up unleashing something. And there's different people that describe seeing different things depending on the area, depending on, I guess, also kind of the folklore in the area too, which could also definitely play a tie in. But yeah, there definitely seems to be a specific portion of the phenomenon that is tied to a specific land. And then on the other side, there's the ones that roam, they're disembodied, but they seem to always need to attach themselves to something or somebody too. So no matter what, there is some type of like attachment to something physical in order to exist here.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I know in Hawaii too. I don't know if you've heard that when people come to visit, they say do not take like the rock or sand from Hawaii to leave it here. And for people who do take it home, that they get cursed. And so there probably is about average 3,500 stones and sands that get sent back from people that took it because they're having bad curses or bad luck when they go home with these. So they send it back to the Big Island. It's happened every year. There's tons of stories that you can find about this.
That's definitely something that kind of plays in a tie at a lot of places, because even like the Bell Witch Cave, I mean, there's 100 different locations I've heard about where it seems like when something has its tie there, you can't separate it. Otherwise, you just get cursed with bad luck. Like that seems to exist anywhere that there's weird phenomenon, and especially with places that have these more natural type spirits, like Hawaii for a prime example. You guys have these spirits that are tied to the land specifically.
Yes.
So it's like when you take something that they're protecting,
Yes.
or you take possibly even a piece of them, depending on how you view it, then it kind of takes in this whole different thing, where kind of the same with like some of the woods that you can't take the stones. Like
interesting.
It seems like there's a lot more to it when you take something from like a nature spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know here in Hawaii too, just even recently, there was a person that came from the mainland who disrespected Hawaii, and he went to Mauna Kea and he urinated on the sacred land, and he videoed it. Like, why would you do that? And of course, he got backlash from everybody. He had to apologize on the news for even doing that. But in Hawaii, not just in Mauna Kea, but anywhere. Like we have sacred falls here. We have a lot of sacred places here. If you do something like that, like urinate on a stone, you could get bad luck because you just desecrated the place. So you have to, what they say here is you need to go back to that place, bow down and apologize, because that could have been something spiritual or sacred a long time ago. So, but there's many stories of that here as well. Desecrating.
Especially something crazy like that. I mean, like going and peeing on like sacred land, like that's like the utmost disrespect at that point. Like you don't know what you're messing with. Like, why would you even want to take the chance? Because a lot of this stuff, now that people are diving into it, like you had this idea of a ghost that, it can't really hurt you. It can maybe scratch you, like whatever. But we seem to be in this weird place where people are noticing that there's this physicality, and then there's also this spiritual aspect of things. So it's like, especially with these like ancient beings, like you don't know what these things are capable of. So like, why take the chance? Even if like you don't fully believe in it, like why even risk it? Just to prove a point to somebody. Like at the end of the day, you're gonna get the bad end of the stick. Like
exactly. Either way, right? Either through spiritually way or even just from the people of the land, because now everybody in Hawaii is mad at this kid. He's probably, I don't know, in his 20s or something, and that's why people in Hawaii don't like these foreigners coming, for that very reason, because they just do something so stupid like that, and it's very disrespectful. So, I mean, I don't even think that you would have to explain that to anybody. And being a Native American yourself, I mean, that's very disrespectful. And that's how these people here feel as well. Very disrespected.
I mean, even just in Hawaii in general, I mean, there's so much to that land that he has this weird aspect to it where, like, you know, in North America, like the continuous United States, that is, like,
Mainland. We say
yeah, the
mainland.
mainlands, yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it. Like, you know, there's
Mm-hmm.
reservations and everybody has their, like, their own
Mm-hmm.
opinion about that and everything, but it's like in Hawaii, it's like the natives, the people that live there forever, like the families go back generations and generations. It's
Yes.
not like it has the same segregation as the mainland. It's like, you know, everybody's amongst everybody. So if you're
Yeah.
there, like, people have families that go back for generations and generations and
Yes.
generations. It's like, again, even if you don't believe in it, like,
Exactly.
why disrespect the people that have been living there for so long? Because they wouldn't come into your house and pee on your floor. Why are you going to come into, you know, their family's home, their ancestors' home,
Yep.
and basically pee on their floor? Like, that is just a crazy concept to me. Like, even
Yeah.
if you don't believe in the spiritual aspect, just as a
Exactly.
person, like, morally, like, I don't know why you would even think that that's remotely okay or funny.
Exactly. I mean, his excuse was, I didn't grow up believing or was taught that anything is sacred, so I didn't know. No, that's not an excuse. You know, that's really not it's just disrespectful, period. Whether you know it's sacred or not. It's just disrespectful. But
He's gonna
for
wake up with the
anyone
Menehune building a wall around the house so he can't
yeah,
escape.
exactly. Yep. For someone that's interested in exploring legends like the Windigo or maybe getting into paranormal investigation, what kind of advice would you give them? Should they take any kind of precautions or?
Well, definitely make sure that you go to places that you're allowed to be at. And if you can get
Mm-hmm.
permission, definitely get permission to do so, because you'd be surprised where you could actually get permission to do things. If you just ask, like, I mean, even going to like a local cemetery or depending on the abandoned building, like it depends on what the state of the building is themselves. But even if you go to like the local police department and you're really respectful and you say, hello, like we're a paranormal investigating, you know, we want to go do paranormal investigating at this location, you know, so everything's going to be recorded, whatever. You know, you might have a cop that's at the station that's like, oh yeah, you know, like I'm into that stuff, I'll go with it and check it out with you guys. Or, you know, if you give off a good impression, they might even say, oh yeah, you know, don't even worry about it, you know, we'll keep an eye from a distance, but we won't bother you guys, like at like a local cemetery or something like that. So if you kind of, you have to look through the right channels, but you know, definitely get permission to be where you're trying to go. And even again, going to like your local police department and kind of just put it all on the table. I mean, the worst they can say is no, but then at least at the most, you know, you won't have to worry about getting caught in a place that you're not supposed to be if you at least ask permission and you're allowed to be there. But number one, that one's definitely number one. Make sure that you guys are allowed to be there. You're not going to get yourselves arrested or anything, or you don't break an entry or anything like that. Number two would be to definitely come with an open mind, but also be skeptic at the same time, because every single bump in the night isn't a ghost. But on the other side, you know, if you get to a point where there's no rational explanation for what it is, then there's a good chance that you might have something. So you kind of have to play both sides of the field on that one. And also, there's two different kind of viewpoints on this, depending on the person. If you're not a medium, you know, it's always fun to know the history of the building, make sure that you are familiar with, you know, the safety of the building, like what condition it's in, when it was built, and even just again, kind of knowing a little bit of background about some of the people or figures or what could possibly be there. Like, make sure you do your research and you fully know what you're dealing with. But then on the other side, some people that are like mediums, you know, if they're doing just like a standard paranormal investigation, they're not like, you know, chasing down like a Sasquatch or a Wendigo or something like that. You know, they'll go in and they'll try to use their abilities to get answers, get names of people, get locations and everything. And then they'll end up going home and then researching then, and then they'll know if they actually ping something, if, you know, they start pulling out the names that actually go into the history of this place without actually having any background or knowing any history of it. So two different ways of going about the research, depending on, I guess, what side you were on. If you have medium abilities, then, you know, maybe go in without knowing anything and you might have some good results. But on the other side, if you don't have any of those abilities, then definitely do some research, or make sure at least somebody on your team has some research and background of it, and at least knows, where you should be specifically. Because there's a lot of like urban legends, for example, that they'll say, oh, this is the location, but then you start diving into it and realize that, this is the real location. But if you didn't do your research, then you might be investigating a building that is just an old man building and there's nothing actually there.
Wow. Good advice. That's awesome. Before we close, Shayn, I want to thank you again for sharing your time and your experience with us. It's been such an intriguing and thought-provoking conversation, and I know our listeners will be captivated as much as I have. So thank you again. And I know you said that you are working on something in the near future. So we'll definitely have to keep an eye open for that. But where can we find your work? Where can we follow you? And where can we keep everything that you're doing, and follow you? Where can we find you?
Well, first and foremost, I appreciate you inviting me to the show. I'm not on this side of the mic very often, so hopefully I didn't rant for too long.
You didn't.
I'm used to being the one that asks the questions and kind of bounces ideas. Like, it always feels weird being on this side. But if anybody wants to check out any of the work that I do, Inquiries of Our Reality with Shayn Jones and Bizarre Encounters, you guys can find those on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, literally any podcast catcher you could possibly think of. I'll be popping up on any of those. You guys can even look up either of those shows on Google, and you guys should be able to find them pretty easy. They take up most of the feeds on it. But on the other side too, if you guys want to hit me up on social media, you guys want to email me, you guys want to contact me, you guys want to check out my Patreon, my merch store, anything like that. I put everything under Open Minds Media, as you had mentioned in the beginning, and then it kind of feeds off into either show that you're looking for. But if you guys want to kind of find the hub for everything that I do, you guys can go and check that out on my Linktree, and that URL is linktr.ee/open_minds_media.
I will link that in the show notes. Thank you again for coming on the show. It's been an honor to have you here. And please send me that photo. And that brings us to an end of another episode. A huge mahalo to Shayn Jones for joining us and sharing his incredible experience with the Windigo and the world of the paranormal. It's always fascinating to hear firsthand stories like these and explore the deeper mysteries behind them. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to follow, subscribe, so you don't miss what's coming next. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a positive review and share this episode with anyone who you think would find it intriguing. Until the next time, guys, take care, stay curious. Bye.
Flowing right, life is a dreamy in Santorini. Swipe up a visa, slaying in Ibiza. 24-karat gold flakes with me pizza. Chilling with me vatos and beaches in Morocco. I need a spa, babe, I'm chilling out all day. Bougie, bougie, I want diamonds in my blue jeans. Bougie, bougie, yes I know I'm bougie. Bougie, bougie, I'm that because I'm pretty. Bougie, bougie, yes I know I'm bougie. Paris to Dubai, first class service, champagne flying high. Shopping in Milan, couture in the sky. From Tokyo nights to the London nights. Stepping out of style, every city's mine. Getting buried on my beach, you ain't never gonna find. Just a classy little legend with ice in the wine. Me strut through the customs, we no wait tonight. Bougie, bougie, I want diamonds in my blue jeans. Bougie, bougie, yes I know I'm bougie. Bougie, bougie, I'm that because I'm pretty. White toes, looks flowing. Just keys, Maldives, done and so. Curbing to my wrist and I'm taking control. Pretty petty little Betty shutting in my style. Red bottoms got them shit, by child. I'm up and away, swirling on the floor. I'm up and away, don't take a price. I'm up and away, I need a double with ice. I'm up and away, please talk to me nice. Up and away, I said talk to me nice.